All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the AWE to NERC EEA Training webinar. My name is Rochelle Weltius, and I'm the one that's going to be taking you through today's session. I'm actually joined virtually by some of my colleagues who might speak up during question and answer periods or just to provide some clarity when needed as we discuss this topic. They're going to be introducing themselves here shortly. And with me today as a co-facilitator from the ISO is Cynthia Hinman. She's going to be monitoring the chat, watching background noises, and just in general making sure we run smoothly today. So Cindy, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. As Rochelle said, I'm in the customer readiness team, and I'm one of our lead client trainers. So I'll be monitoring the chat, and if you need anything, you can send me a chat personally or send it to everyone, and let us know if you have questions. Look forward to today's session. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Cindy. Also, in an effort to increase transparency and provide greater service to our stakeholders, we are going to be recording this webinar today. It's going to get posted on our website so you can review it in the future and for those who aren't able to join today's call. After this training is complete, I'm also going to post these slides on kaiso.com along with that recording I just talked about, and you can find both of those in our Learning Center under New Modules, or you can find them on the Release Planning page under Summer 2022 Releases. Also, as we progress through the training, I'm going to stop a few times just for some question and answer periods, and I'm going to document the questions that you guys have so I can update the training accordingly. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. But first, I'd like our subject matter expert to introduce herself. Tricia, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the group today.
Hi, I'm Tricia Johnstone, Director of Operational Readiness. And yeah, happy to be here. Thank you all for attending.
Awesome. Thanks, Tricia. So let's begin today's training with a little bit of housekeeping. The first thing I'm going to ask is to make sure that you keep yourself muted today unless you have a question. I've set WebEx so that you all will enter automatically muted, but if you do want to ask a question, you will have to take yourself off of mute. So be conscious of that. If you have a question, you can ask in one of two ways. You can either ask over the phone, or you can type your question directly into the chat if you'd like to do that. If you want to ask a question verbally, we're going to ask that you raise your hand in WebEx. So during those question and answer periods, we know whom to call on, and we're doing so in an orderly fashion. Moving on to today's agenda, this is what we're going to be going over. We're going to review the ISO's responsibility with regards to emergency notices. We're going to talk a little bit about the current AWE process and how it is going to be changing. And we're going to walk through the NERC EEA notification levels. We're going to take a look at some samples of these new NERC EEA notifications. And we're going to talk about the process to subscribe and or unsubscribe to those notifications if you are not already getting them. And last but not least, we're going to discuss the resources you can use to get additional information outside of this training session. So as always, I like to start these sessions with a little bit of a poll. I want to see where everybody falls. So I want to know if you are familiar with the current California ISO AWE or Alerts, Warnings, and Emergencies Notification level. So you can choose A for, oh yes, you're very familiar with them. B, yeah, you get them and use them pretty often. C, you've heard about them or seen them once or twice. Or D, I'm sorry, what are AWEs again? So on your screen, I've went ahead and opened up the poll. You have about 30 seconds to answer that. Just want to see kind of what level of knowledge we have on the phone today. We have almost 100 participants in the training, so this is great. All right, let's see. Great. I see some answers coming in. This is perfect. Okay, give us 1 second here. Awesome. All right, so hopefully you guys can see your poll results there for you in front of you. We have about 21% of us very familiar. That's awesome. 17% of us who have used these very often. 16% of us who have seen or heard them once or twice, and a couple of us that are asking what are AWEs, and that is fine. You're in the right place because we're going to talk about what they are and how that process is changing. Fantastic. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into today's training. So we're going to do a quick overview of what emergency notices are and how those are changing. But first things first, I want to talk a little bit about today's training and how it's going to review the changes from the AWE notification system to the NERC EEA notification system. So with this training, I am assuming some sort of knowledge with the current AWE notification system. For the 8% of you that said you're not familiar, don't worry, I am going to talk about the old AWE notifications and how they correspond to the new notices. But if you want some additional information on the current process, it is changing soon here, you can see our emergency response CBT on the Learning Center. Now, this change is going to be implemented into production as of May 1st, 2022. So that's pretty soon here, just in a few weeks. And that's why we're doing this training now. So here's some background with regards to notifications and why they're important. Energy shortages can be caused by a bunch of different things: persistent high heat, equipment failures, weather events. These events most likely occurred during the summer months, as you noticed, weather events, wildfires, those kinds of things. And they can be local shortages or they can be statewide. So those notifications, we need to notify local folks or statewide folks. And they're also issued at varying times. So what you're seeing in front of you right now, for those of you that aren't familiar with our AWE levels, over to the left, you can see a list of the current AWE levels, and over to the right, the timing in which we send them. So we have our flex alerts. Ideally, we're issuing those in advance, as much advance notice as we know. We have our restricted maintenance operation notices. Those are issued in real time or in advance as needed. Our transmission emergencies, which are issued in real time. We have our alerts, which are issued in advance, typically the day ahead by 1500 hours. And then we have our warnings, our stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, which are issued in real time. So these are the current levels that you're going to see with these notifications, and we're going to talk about how they correspond to the new NERC EEA levels in just a second. But before we do that, let's talk about the responsibility of the California ISO with regards to these notifications. Now, our tariff, specifically tariff section 7.7.4, outlines the requirement that the ISO has to ensure that procedures are in place to notify market participants and the public of any sort of potential energy shortage when those electricity supplies get tight. So that's where the requirement for these notifications is coming from. You can find the tariff on our website if you'd like to take a look and read through this section yourself under regulatory and then under rules. Now, as I mentioned, the ISO used and will continue to use until May 1st these notifications we call AWEs, which stands for alerts, warnings, and emergencies. These essentially signal activation of our system emergency procedures. And this AWE process has been in place for a long while. We've been using them since 1998. So this is a huge change for us and a big change because we're going to transition to this new system. And that is our NERC EEA, or Energy Emergency Alert designations. And that will be as of May 1st. And you're probably wondering, if you've had this system in place since 1998, why are you making this change? So here are 3 reasons for you with regards to why we're making this edit. First of all, we want to align our emergency levels with our NERC standards. NERC uses the EEA emergency notifications, and so we want to use those emergency notifications. We also want to align our emergency levels with the same notifications that the reliability coordinators use, as well as our neighboring balancing authorities. So we're all using essentially the same language during shortages, and we don't require any sort of translation between those notifications. So that's the reason and the push for the change. So let's go ahead and get into what this looks like at a high level, and then we're going to go into each specific level and talk about what it means and when it's going to be delivered. So to the left, you're seeing our current levels, as I already mentioned. The items in gray are not changing. So we still have flex alerts. We still have restricted maintenance operations. We're still going to be using transmission emergencies just as before. Okay. Now to the left, you can see the future emergency levels, or the NERC EEA levels, and how they correspond to the current AWE levels. Okay. So currently we have what's called an alert. As of May 1st, you're going to see something coming through called an EEA watch. Okay. It directly corresponds to an alert. It means the same thing. We're just naming it something a little bit different. Okay. Next, we have warnings with regards to the AWE levels. And a warning is going to correspond with an EEA2, an EEA1, I apologize. There's one exception to that. In a warning right now with AWE, part of that warning triggers demand response programs, and that is going to correspond with an EEA2 moving forward, as you can see in the yellow there. So that one's not quite a one-to-one correlation, but it's pretty close. And I do want to mention that triggering of those demand response programs is always correlated to an EEA2 with regards to reliability coordinators, and that is not changing. Okay. Also, everything that fell within a stage 1 of an AWE is now going to fall within an EEA2 moving forward. So that is a yellow item. Now moving down to a stage 2 and a stage 3, those are combined into what we're calling an EEA3, or what NERC is calling an EEA3. Also, you're going to see another type of notification as well. If they're both EEA3s, one is just an EEA3 and one is an EEA3 firm load interruption, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so here are your changes at a high level. Now what I'm going to do is go through each specific one so we can talk about these levels, give that 8% that aren't familiar with AWEs a little bit more knowledge with regards to what happens at each level. And then I'm going to go ahead and pause for questions. All right, moving on. Really quickly at a super high level, because these are not changing, let's talk about flex alerts, let's talk about restricted maintenance operations, and let's talk about transmission emergencies. So during a flex alert, what is essentially happening is we are notifying the public of potential energy shortages, okay? That's essentially what's needed. We need public awareness of this shortage so that hopefully they can reduce demand for that energy by voluntary means. And as I mentioned, this is ideally issued in advance, in the day ahead, so that you're all aware that this is going on. With regards to restricted maintenance operations, what's happening is it's an actual or a potential impact to balancing and or transmission operations. So there's some sort of issue or impact to transmission operations, and what we ask of you is to reschedule any planned work to keep equipment and resources in services so that it can't be a threat to grid reliability. Again, we try to issue these in advance, one day or more if possible. And lastly, with regards to transmission emergencies, okay, it could be system-wide, it could be local, and essentially, in this case, those load management procedures may be in effect in that impacted area. We may need additional bids, incremental dispatches, emergency assistance, et cetera. Now, you're going to notice here that the NERC EEA levels say NA because there is no corresponding NERC level for these three AWE levels, and we will continue to use them as we use them today. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the NERC EEA levels. So the current level is alert, and the new level is an EEA watch. So what is happening during an EEA watch? Basically, in the day-ahead analysis, they're forecasting that there is 1 or more hours that are energy deficient. What we need, additional bids, right? Incremental dispatch, and we issue that a day in advance by 1,500 hours, typically, okay? Now, in a warning, a current warning, that is going to translate to an EEA1 moving forward. And in that case, that's a real-time analysis that's forecasting 1 or more of those hours as energy deficient. Okay, so essentially all available generation is in or is projected to be in use. In this case, you want to be prepared for that dispatch of demand response resources. Okay, that happens during an EEA2, but you want to prepare for it if you see an EEA1. As we move on to an EEA2, you can see that they correspond to a warning, specifically that dispatching of those demand response programs, but also that stage 1 AWE level. Essentially, all available UDC or MSS energy is in use, and we have dispatched those demand response programs. These are typically issued in real time for the current or for the next hour. So you'll know either currently when it's happening or right before it's happening. Now, an EEA3 is a combination of both a current stage 2 and stage 3 levels. Basically, the balancing authority is unable to maintain their contingency reserves. We're counting that armed firm load as contingency reserves, and we're unable to maintain that during as I mentioned, I'm going to skip back here really quick. During this firm load interruption, you're going to see another notification in addition to an EEA3 if we actually have to do that load shed. All right, and those are issued in real time for the current hour or for the next hour, and specifically with the load shed within that next 10 minutes. All right. So let's do a quick main takeaway of the differences between the AWE notifications and the EEA notifications. And then we're going to go ahead and pause for questions. I saw some questions already coming through the chat. We have Tricia ready to go. She is our subject matter expert and is so knowledgeable about this process. So the main takeaways I want you to get from this, that our warning corresponds with an EEA1, but that RDRR, or demand response dispatch, is going to correspond with an EEA2. Okay. Now, CAISO enforces it in the EEA2, but customers, of course, can dispatch before that level. Okay. And then the second major change here, maybe change is not the right word, takeaway, right, is that a stage 2 and a stage 3 AWE have been combined into an EEA3. A stage 2 is when we're arming that firm load as those non-spend contingencies, and then in a stage 3, that's when that firm load shed is imminent. I want to mention, though, that those blast calls and that load interruption notification, though, as part of an EEA3 is only done when that load shed is required. So you're only going to see that additional notification and that phone call to operators when that's required. So with that, I want to pause and I want to go ahead and take questions. I still have some more information for you with regards to subscribing to these and where you can find more information and how we send them. But I want to spend some time talking about and answering your questions about the differences between these AWE levels and these EEA levels. So I'm going to take verbal questions first, and then we're going to go ahead and go to the chat. So Cindy, do we have any hand raises before we move to the chat questions?
I do see one hand raised. Houston, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, when will exports start to be curtailed?
All right. Tricia, do you want to go ahead and answer Houston's question?
Yes, so that's a good question, Houston. So I guess there are kind of two parts to this. So there's the what's happening with the market activity that is kind of separate from the emergency, although there's definitely a correlation, when the resources are getting tight and things like that. We don't formally have it in our procedure to say, when we hit an EEA2 or when we're in an EEA2 with an EEA3 imminent, that our operators are going to proactively start going through and cutting the export schedules. We are attempting to let the market try to resolve that. But one of the things that we've, had is they're kind of as a separate topic, as there's been some stakeholder initiative work in this space to really try and fine tune which schedules are preserved under those conditions versus which schedules are getting, reduced or curtailed based on contract types and things like that. So not directly correlated with the EEAs, but like I said, there's definitely a relationship when we start getting into those EEA2, EEA3 conditions, then we would expect that the market would actually be signaling, that, hey, we don't have the resources necessarily to support all of the schedules still. Hopefully that helps.
Great. Thanks, Tricia. All right. Did you have any questions?
Yes, we have a few more questions, and we have some things in the chat as well. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing your name right. Pamela, can you unmute yourself?
Hi. Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, just on slide 16, the stage 2, combining stage 2 and stage 3 into a EEA3, as we understand it, and I'm just checking now, right? Is this correct? A EEA3 will be issued, and separate to that, instructions will be provided to the entities, PTOs, for the actual arming of the load. And then an additional notice will be sent for the stage 3 with firm load interruptions.
That you are correct, Pamela. So yeah, when we initially go into the EEA3, assuming that the situation is not quickly escalating, we would be contacting all of the utility distribution companies and metered subsystem companies and requesting that they arm firm load that could be removed in 10 minutes, so we could count it as contingency reserves. And then the next step after that, if we do get into the firm load shedding, then yes, we have an additional A to B message that's EEA3 firm load interruptions with like a total megawatt value, and then the operators would be making the phone calls to the separate grid control centers with the pro rata allocations by UDC and MSS entity. So we have also some blast call functionality that we need to test again. It was kind of mixed success last year, but if it's possible to get you all on the phone at once, that would be a lot more efficient, so we could just go down the list and give out those pro rata allocations.
So Tricia, that's where you refer to that blast call in the procedure, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next we have a question from Bob Emmer. You have your hand raised. Can you take yourself off mute? Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, hi Tricia. We have been at least, and we need to transition to using the EEA points for reporting in our summer assessment the probability of entering into each of these stages, where in the past we've shown the probability of entering the stage 1, 2, and 3. And each of those had specific operating reserve thresholds for entering into stage 2 and stage 3. Is there something similar to that for the EEAs that we can use and determine what realm we are based on operating reserves and the model results?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Bob. So it's no longer correlated with the operating reserve levels. So what's happening at an EEA1 is we are not deficient on our contingency reserves. So we're not even deficient on energy supply yet. It's really just a signal, hey, all resources are in use, or really it's probably projecting out future hours. Like we're issuing this at 1 or 2 o'clock saying, hey, between 1700 and 2100, you know, these future hours, all resources in use. The EEA2, we're now at the point where we are out of probably all of our traditional resources, and we're getting tapped out to the level that we've got to exercise those emergency demand response programs, but we're still whole from a contingency reserve standpoint. So we are preserving those contingency reserves as long as possible. It's really when we go into the EEA3 that now we are in a reserve deficiency. So we can talk about it a little bit more internally and give you some use cases on that. So that way you could use it, you know, maybe towards some of that study criteria.
Okay. Yeah, we'd appreciate if you could give us something on that. Yeah, we're actually developing a report right now, so we need that pretty quickly.
All right, thank you.
And I had to put that in the chat as well, so you could disregard that question.
Okay, thanks, Bob. We did have a couple of things in the chat that I wanted to mention. First of all, someone asked if this was, if we could get NERC CEHs for this particular course. And no, unfortunately, this is not eligible for NERC CEHs. Additionally, we had a question, and Tricia answered it, but I'm going to ask it out loud just for those of you who might not have seen it in the chat. Are RMOs applicable to generation and or transmission? So Tricia, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we can issue restricted maintenance operations for generation only, transmission only, or for both. And then we also have templated messages for RMOs if we're forecasting gas supply issues. And then similar to all of our other messages, we can issue like RMO or transmission emergency for a specific local area or a regional area, you know, Northern California, Southern California, Edison, San Diego areas separately, or we can issue them system-wide.
Okay, thank you. We have 2 more questions in the chat right now. The first one is there an example of how notification systems will change between AWE and EEA? Will there be just a text change from warning to EEA1? That's from Alex.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're trying to make it as seamless as possible. So all of those current systems where you're receiving those messages, if you're on the email distribution list, if you've got the ISO Today app, if you're picking up those messages off of M&S or Oasis, all those endpoints are still the same. So it really is just a text change that you would be seeing the EEA1 like level coming through, and then some slight changes to the templates. And out on our public website right now, if you go to rules, operating procedures, we've got the draft 4420 posted and also a 4420C, which actually has those draft message templates.
All right, thank you. So I have one more question in the chat, and I do see a hand raised. So first, we have a question from Joseph Merrill. How will we know whether firm load shedding is needed when we see an EEA3 notification? Lack of firm load shedding notice implies the EEA3 is like the old stage 2?
That's correct. Yeah, when we initially go into the EEA3, firm load shedding, you know, may be on the horizon, but we might not be there yet, and we should have an EEA3 firm load interruption notice if we're actually proceeding with the firm load shedding. That being said, so you know, not knowing which company you work for, Joseph, but all of our utility distribution companies and metered subsystem companies, we have system status update emails that our grid ops management is sending out specifically to grid control centers for those contacts. So if we see some of these conditions coming, we start sending emails with kind of supplemental information about, hey, you know, we're in the EEA1 and here's why, here's what's going on, here's more background. And we're also going to be providing information about, hey, we're projecting that, you know, by 1800, we may need to start counting load towards contingency reserves. And if we do that, here's an estimate on what your pro rata is going to be. Or, hey, we're projecting at this hour, we may get into firm load shedding. And if we do, then here's what your estimated pro rata would be. Like if we think that we're going to be short by 400, you know, here's what your share will be. And part of the reason we started doing that last summer was that all of the utilities asked us to provide more notice. So that way they had the opportunity to identify which load blocks would be impacted if we did get into firm load shedding. So, I mean, if we have a sudden onset event, then, you know, we may not have time to get all that lined up. But assuming it's like a heat event where we're kind of creeping through it throughout the day, those system status updates emails would be coming. And so you would have a heads up on, you know, if we get into that condition, if it worsens, if we lose any resources, then, you know, we'd be projecting which hours we would be seeing that. Oh, okay, CEC. I'm not sure if CEC gets those emails, but we do include Cal OES on those emails. So maybe we can touch base after. All right, okay, thanks.
Okay, we do have a hand raised. Sabrina, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, Sabrina Bruno, PG&E. So that was exactly what my question was going to be. So just for clarity, though, we would be in an EEA3. Would those emails be coming out before we're requested to arm firm load? We'll have information before that, so we'll know the amount of megawatts, and we could do some notifications on our side.
Correct. Yeah, if it, you know, once again, if we see it coming, if it's not a sudden onset event, yes, we would have that that email communication going out as early as possible.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other, we just got another question from Alex. What DR programs will the change in notifications affect? I know ELRP will be particularly affected, but will DRAM, et cetera, notifications change?
That's a good question. So specifically with the ELRP, this is reflected in the draft 4420 that's posted. There have been some program changes this year where there are certain ELRP programs that the investor-owned utilities could make a decision to activate based on like a Flex Alert and an EEA watch. But that's a utility activation decision. That's not a dispatch by CAISO. And then the RDRR program, it would be enabled and if needed, it would be, you know, forced exceptional dispatch in an EEA2. And that's consistent with what that's been in the past. If there are any other kind of load modifying demand response type programs out there which are not registered under those existing programs, when we're in that EEA2, if we need it, we'll be contacting the utilities to say, hey, do you have anything else? Are you aware of any other, you know, demand response or interruptibles out there that we might be able to get a hold of? And sometimes there are still some little incremental megawatts out there.
All right. Thank you, Tricia. I think that is all the questions that I see for now. Nothing in the chat and no hands raised. Rochelle?
All right. Thanks, Cindy, and thanks, Tricia. We're going to move on and we're going to look at some of those samples. You guys had some great questions about what do they look like, how can I receive them, and that's what we're going to go over now. So the first thing I wanted to mention is the ISO communications method document. It houses all of the information on the ways that we send out emergency notification information. It goes over each type of notification and what venues we send them through. You can find this document on our website, CAISO.com. I've actually put a link directly there for you, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the grid that's at the bottom of the document because It's, to me, the most helpful with regards to how these are sent. So you can see we have all of the notifications I talked about today listed: flex alerts, restricted maintenance operations, and then EEA watches, EEA 1s, EEA 2s, EEA 3, and then finally the all clear. And so you can see a lot of these go through Twitter. They also go through M&S, GMS, through the actual EA notification system, or via email typically, through a notice, or through a customer service email or customer service notification. That's usually how we send the all clear. And then I talked a little bit about that blast call, and that is only done during an EEA 3. So if you have not already looked at this document or downloaded this document, I highly recommend that you do so and read through it so you can gain additional information with regards to the venues for how these are sent. Now, during or in the chat, someone asked a question of what are these going to look like? Is it just changing to the wording, to the title? And as Tricia mentioned, that as these were being developed, the language was kept as similar to the AWEs as possible. What you're looking at here is a sample of that email notification that's going out. So you have an EEA watch in front of you, and you also have an EEA 2. They're labeled so as the subject, and then underneath that, you're going to get the reason and all of the additional information if you need it. So this is essentially what those notifications are going to look like. From a phone standpoint, phone alerts are going to look as they did before, as well as notifications coming through the ISO Today app. Both those phone alerts and the app are going to be updated to reflect those new EEA notification levels as of May 1st, 2022. So whatever way you get your notifications currently, that will be changed for the May 1st go live. But what if you don't get notifications right now? How can you subscribe to them? So let's talk a little bit about that. Actually, this year, the ISO is going to be updating their AWE or EA notification distribution list. So as of tomorrow, the ISO is going to send an email notification to every single contact that we have in our current distribution list. So this will happen on 4/21 in the afternoon tomorrow, Pacific time. Okay. Now, if you receive the email and you want to be removed, so you find out you get the email and you say, hey, I don't need these, you can respond to the email and request to be removed from that distribution list, and we'll take you off. Now, if you're attending this training, chances are you probably want that notification. Now, if you don't receive it by 4/22, so by Friday, you notice you didn't get anything in your inbox and you want to be added to that distribution list, we're going to ask that you submit a city ticket, and you want to label it EA request for addition in the subject field so that we can place you on that distribution list. Now, I want to mention and remind you to check your junk and trash folder. Occasionally, these notification emails end up in one of those folders. I just want to keep you from sending, having to submit a ticket and us to say, actually, you're already on here. So make sure you're looking through your trash folder. And this is what that email that we send out tomorrow is going to look like. It's just going to say we're going to be changing our AWE notifications. If you know someone from your organization that wants to be added, submit a ticket. If you want to be added, submit a ticket. Now, there are two different ways you can submit a city ticket. The first one is if you know that individuals within your organization have access to city, but you don't, you can work with someone in your organization to submit that ticket. Now, if you have access, great, you can go ahead and submit it yourself, or someone in your organization has access, have them submit that ticket. If no one that you know of has access to our ticketing system, City, you can submit an inquiry on our Contact Us page on kaiso.com. So just make sure to include that subject line that I mentioned, EA request for addition, so we know what that request is for. You want to make sure your name and the email address of the person that wants to get added is listed in the comment field. You can do more than one. You don't have to submit separate tickets from multiple people. Go ahead and just list everyone who needs to be on that distribution list on the ticket. So 2 different ways. If you have Citi, create a ticket directly in Citi. If you don't, go to the Contact Us page on kaiso.com. Now, with regards to some additional resources, Tricia mentioned some of these operational procedures. We have the NERC standards that are listed here for emergency operations. We have our RC West procedures that are available for you to review, as well as our KAISO BA procedures, 4420, 4410, 4510, and 4510A. I've linked all of those on this slide here for you, so if you want to pop open this presentation after the training and after I post this, you can get direct links there, or if you don't want to wait for that, all of our operational procedures can be found directly on kaiso.com under operating procedures. So you can use the link on the PowerPoint, or you can go here. Lastly, I want to talk about some resources for your organization. So if you are in this training representing your organization and you think, hey, definitely more people in my organization need to know about this change than just me, you have a couple of options. One, they can listen to this training. It will be posted on kaiso.com and our Learning Center after this training is over. Or what we've also done is created a very short 10-minute video that reviews these changes. So they don't have to sit through the hour-long version of this recording. We really encourage you to watch this. We encourage you to share it within your organization, send the link out in your organization. You can find a link to this training video both on our Learning Center, I'll show you where that is directly in just a second, and on the Summer 2022 release page. So it goes over all the information I've gone over with you today, just in brevity rather than throughout the hour. So before we pause for final questions, I have one more poll I want to ask you. And so give me 1 second, I'm gonna get this set up for you. Now that you have gone through this training, I wanna know how prepared you feel for the changes from the AWE notification system to the NERC EEA notification system. Okay, so I'm gonna open the poll right now and I'm gonna read through your choices here. So you're a rock star, you say, bring it on, I am good to go, I'm prepared. B, I think I'm good to go. C, you know what, Rochelle, I really wanna go through this material just a few more times. If that's the case, you know, go through his PowerPoint, watch the recording, the video we put out. And D, that's fine too. You know, truthfully, I'm kind of still a little bit confused about this transition, and that's fine as well. I just kind of want to see how we feel as a group. Let's see, I have a little bit more time. Who do we have? Let's see. All right, we still have some responses coming in. All right. Okay, awesome. So we have some of us that feel, 15% of us say bring it on, awesome. The majority of us saying, I think I'm good to go. I hope that you utilize the resources that I've listed here for you in the presentation. A couple of you wanting to go through the material a few more times, that is fantastic. I will have both this presentation and a recording of this presentation hopefully up on our Learning Center by the end of today for you. And 1 or 2 of you still confused, not a problem. We always want you to reach out to us if you still have questions. So before we wrap up today though, I wanna pause and see if you have any final questions for myself or for Tricia about this change. So we'll take scans, and then after that, we'll go to the chat. So Cindy, do we have any verbal questions?
I do not see any hands raised. And the only question in the chat was about the posting of the presentation. I posted a link to where the presentation will be in the chat. And if you look there now, you will see the video. The video is already posted there. And as Rochelle mentioned, she'll be posting the presentation, this presentation and the recording as soon as she can. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Cindy. Oh, we do have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Jesus Martinez, City of Riverside. Just wanted to verify, will this be covered as part of the summer preparedness training on the meeting on the 25th also?
Yes, it will.
Yes.
So we're going over the same content, correct?
Okay, thank you.
I do see a hand raised, and it's Joseph Merrill. Joseph, do you want to unmute yourself? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering if anyone has any kind of detail. So if we have a widespread transmission emergency that doesn't rise to the level of like an EEA, what's the distinction? I guess to get a little, I mean, because I remember, you know, last year we had a single line transmission emergency, or at least a fire caused single line.
Correct.
And so then if you get into a more widespread, go ahead.
It's a really good question. So I think it really depends on what the impact of the event is on like a local area or a regional area, you know, versus what the impact is for the balancing authority as a whole, right? So we could have transmission, like specific transmission lines out in a local area, which is inhibiting our ability to get energy into that pocket, but the VA as a whole is all right. So that's going to be a transmission emergency. And we're going to be doing everything we can to try and protect resources and everything else, you know, specifically to help keep that area intact. But if we have something larger going on, especially where like some of these large wildfires have impacted major interties and probably aren't even just impacting CAISO, they may be impacting bank and TID and others as well, right? So those it's likely that we would be more getting into these EEA type levels.
Great, thank you.
All right. One last thing I just want to share with you guys before we wrap up. As promised, I told you where you can find that 10-minute video that goes over the same information that we went over today. So on the California ISO website, under Participate and then to the Learning Center, you're going to see all the way over to the right where it says New Modules, and right here is the link for that video. So as I mentioned, socialize it within your organization. It's really great, and we'll make sure everyone is prepared for this change. All right, so with that, I just want to mention one more thing, and that is shortly you're going to receive an email with the request to complete a training evaluation for today's session. Please take a minute to complete the survey. It really allows us to create better and more effective training for you in the future. Also, if you have any questions about anything presented here today, you can always email us at customerreadiness@caiso.com, and this presentation will be up shortly. So with that, that concludes our webinar for today. I really want to thank you all for your participation. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Tricia. We really hope that you found it useful and informative, and have a great day.